In the 1870s, somewhere in the American West, a worker had a problem that seems almost too small to matter. His pants kept tearing, not because the fabric was weak. The cloth was already built for punishment. The problem was the pockets. Every time a miner, laborer, or mechanic shoved his hands or tools inside, the stitching absorbed the strain. Eventually, the thread gave way. A tailor named Jacob Davis looked at that failure and tried something unusual. He stopped relying on thread. He added metal. On the 20th of May, 1873, Davis and Levi Strauss secured a patent for reinforcing those vulnerable points with rivets. It was a tiny engineering fix for men whose clothes were being destroyed by work, but that tiny piece of copper would help create something neither man could have fully imagined. Because the trousers built for miners and laborers would escape the mines, cowboys would turn them into mythology. Teenagers would turn them into rebellion. Designers would turn them into luxury. And eventually, factories would deliberately rip, fade, scrape, and age brand new jeans so that people could buy the appearance of a life they had never lived. This is how work pants became a fashion empire. Long before that empire existed, clothing in the 19th century American West functioned almost like equipment. Railroad crews lifted timber, drove spikes, dragged iron, and spent entire days rubbing cloth against dirt, wood, and metal. Farmers knelt in fields. Mechanics bent over machinery. Teamsters climbed wagons and hauled cargo across rough roads. Every movement pulled at their clothes. For a laborer, a damaged pair of trousers was not a minor inconvenience. Replacing clothing cost money. Repairing it took time, and a repaired seam might simply fail again under the same pressure. Workwear, therefore, had to justify every cent spent on it. These men did not need trousers designed for drawing rooms or fashionable city streets. They needed clothing that could survive another shift, another week, another season. Heavy cotton fabrics already provided part of the answer. But the history of jeans did not begin with the invention of denim. Decades before the famous 1873 patent, Americans were already using denim for demanding physical work. One surviving pair of American work trousers, dating to around 1840, demonstrates why. The trousers were largely made from another heavy cotton fabric, but across the knees and thighs exactly where bending, crawling, and friction would cause the greatest damage, someone had sewn large patches of denim. The repair is rough, but its meaning is obvious. When the original material failed, denim was trusted to reinforce it. A surviving American woman's work jacket from around 1850 was also made from blue denim, probably for outdoor labor. Long before blue jeans became a recognizable product, the fabric had already found its place wherever clothing needed to withstand dirt, friction, and repeated use. That changes the familiar story. Levi Strauss did not discover a miraculous new cloth and introduce it to workers who had never seen it before. The workers were already there. The denim was already there. The unresolved problem was construction. A tough fabric could survive while the places holding the garment together still failed. Stitches loosened. Pocket openings split. Areas under repeated strain separated even when the surrounding cloth remained usable. That was the weakness Jacob Davis confronted in Reno, Nevada. In January 1871, according to testimony Davis later gave, a woman came into his tailor shop with a practical request. She wanted a pair of trousers strong enough for her husband. Davis had recently been using metal rivets to fasten straps onto horse blankets. Some of those rivets were still lying on his workbench. He decided to try one on the trousers. Instead of depending entirely on stitches at the points most likely to pull apart, Davis hammered metal through the layers of cloth at the pocket corners. The idea was almost embarrassingly simple. Thread could loosen. A rivet physically clamped the fabric together. The customer took the trousers away. Soon Davis began using the same method on other heavy work pants made from denim and cotton duck. He had not invented a new fabric. He had changed the architecture of the garment. The improvement was small enough to fit between two fingers, yet important enough that Davis quickly understood competitors could copy it. By 1872, the tailor had a new problem. Protecting an invention required money. expanding production required even more. His Reno shop was not built to manufacture reinforced trousers in large quantities, so Davis wrote to one of his suppliers in San Francisco, Levi Strauss & Co. Strauss occupied a very different position in the economy of the West. He was not a tailor experimenting over a workbench. He was an established dry goods merchant with access to fabric, customers, capital, and distribution. Davis had the construction method. Strauss had the commercial machinery needed to spread it. The proposal joined the two: help finance the patent and share the rights. On the 20th of May, 1873, U.S. Patent number 139,121 was granted to Jacob Davis, with an interest assigned to Levi Strauss & Company. The patent described an improvement in fastening pocket openings with metal rivets or similar fasteners so that repeated pressure would not tear the sewn areas apart. The wording was narrow, the consequences were not. Davis moved to San Francisco and became involved in manufacturing the riveted garments. The setting now changed from one tailor shop to organized production. Stacks of heavy cloth could be cut into pieces. Sewing machines joined them. Workers reinforced specific stress points with small metal fasteners. Finished trousers could be bundled and sent through an established commercial network. The rivet had moved from repair to production. That transition was crucial. A useful invention can disappear if it depends on one craftsperson making one object at a time. Strauss and Davis turned a practical solution into something repeatable, and the reinforcement had another advantage. Customers could see it. The copper at the pocket corners became physical evidence that these trousers had been constructed differently from ordinary work pants. Durability was no longer only a promise made by a shopkeeper. The garment displayed the claim on its surface. Soon, the company began building recognition around that promise. In 1886, Levi Strauss & Co. introduced one of the most memorable images in workwear advertising: two horses pulling in opposite directions on the same pair of trousers. The pants remain intact between them. No complicated explanation was required. In a West where customers spoke different languages and literacy was far from universal, the image communicated the message immediately. A customer could walk into a general store and ask for the trousers with the two horses. That visual identity became especially important because the Davis-Strauss patent would not last forever. In 1890, the patent expired. Competitors could now use riveted construction too. The company could no longer depend on exclusive legal control of the feature that had helped distinguish its trousers. Recognition, therefore, mattered more. That same year, Levi Strauss & Co. began using the lot number 501 for its riveted waist overalls. A number would eventually become one of the most famous names in clothing. But at the time, the trousers still belonged primarily to the working world. Their meaning came from use. Dust worked into the cloth. Sunlight gradually changed the color. Repairs accumulated. Fabric softened around the body. A heavily worn pair recorded where its owner had been and what he had done. Those marks were not designed in a studio. They were consequences. And that accidental visual language would become extremely valuable once people who did not perform those jobs began wanting the image associated with them. By the 1930s, that was already happening. Wealthier Americans could travel west for vacations at dude ranches in places such as Wyoming, Montana, and Arizona. Guests rode horses, ate near ranch hands, slept under open skies, and briefly entered a romantic version of frontier life that felt completely different from the cities they had left behind. They also dressed for the experience. Blue jeans fit perfectly. A visitor who had never driven cattle could put on denim, boots, and a western shirt and immediately borrow the appearance of someone who had. The garment still carried associations created by physical work, but those associations could now be worn during leisure. Hollywood magnified the transformation. Cowboy films filled screens with horses, dust, open country, danger, independence, and men whose clothes appeared functional rather than refined. Millions of viewers encountered denim within stories where the West was no longer merely a workplace. It was mythology. Fashion soon entered the same territory. In 1934, Levi Strauss & Co. introduced Lady Levi's, aimed partly at women visiting dude ranches. A year later, Vogue described Western chic for ranch vacations, including blue jeans, cowboy boots, and a Stetson. Imagine a woman in New York packing for such a trip. She folds denim into a suitcase not because she expects to repair railroad track, crawl through a mine, or spend years tending cattle. She wants to look as though she belongs in the world she is traveling to experience. This was a decisive cultural shift. Jeans had gained the ability to give the wearer instant access to a story, toughness, independence, the frontier. People no longer needed to perform the labor that had created those associations. They could wear them. Then war carried denim far beyond the landscapes where that mythology had formed. During World War II, women entered industrial jobs in enormous numbers. In Richmond, California, Phyllis Gould trained as a welder and worked at the Kaiser shipyards building vessels for the Pacific War. Her work clothes included cuffed Levi's jeans and boots. Welding sparks struck the denim while she stood among steel plates, machinery, noise, and unfinished ships. For women like Gould, trousers were not a Western costume. They were part of entering jobs traditionally dominated by men. Denim became connected to another powerful image, the American wartime worker. At the same time, American servicemen carried jeans overseas. GIs packed them with their belongings and wore them off-duty in foreign cities and around Allied bases. Some sold or traded pairs to British and other servicemen who wanted the distinctly American garment. Imagine a street near an Allied base in Europe. Military uniforms dominate the scene. Then an American soldier appears during leave, wearing blue denim. The trousers carry no flag, no military insignia, no written declaration of nationality. Yet to many people encountering them, they still look American. Before the war, denim's imagery had been tied strongly to particular occupations and Western landscapes. War widened the association. Ships, military bases, troop movements, and soldiers carried the garment through countries where few people had ever seen an actual American cowboy or miner. Jeans were becoming part of the visual vocabulary of the United States itself. But the meaning would change again almost immediately. In the 1950s, respectable adults began to distrust the garment. The shift was visible on cinema screens. In 1953, Marlon Brando appeared in The Wild One as motorcycle gang leader Johnny Strabler, dressed in denim and black leather. 2 years later, James Dean played Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause. Dean's character looked young, angry, vulnerable, and uncomfortable inside the ordered adult world surrounding him. His clothes became part of that image. A teenager could leave a cinema in 1955, pull on a pair of jeans, and carry some of that visual defiance onto the street without saying anything. Adults noticed. Some school districts banned jeans or restricted them because of their association with juvenile delinquency and teenage unrest. Now the garment itself could become part of a confrontation. A student might approach the school entrance wearing denim and be told that what he had chosen to wear was unacceptable. The rule was intended to impose conformity, but it created an unexpected effect. If parents, principals, and teachers disliked jeans, then jeans became more useful to young people trying to separate themselves from those very authorities. Disapproval increased their cultural power. A teenager did not need expensive tailoring to make the statement. Jeans, a t-shirt, and the right posture could be enough. Hollywood had not invented teenage rebellion. Denim certainly did not cause juvenile delinquency. But film stars gave disaffection a recognizable silhouette, while adult resistance gave that silhouette something to push against. The garment had acquired a new kind of value, attitude. And the next generation would make the message even more personal. During the 1960s and early 1970s, members of the counterculture began treating denim as a canvas. Used jeans were patched instead of discarded. Flowers, symbols, slogans, and patterns were embroidered onto the legs. Hems were opened and widened into bell-bottoms. Fabric was faded, repaired, painted, beaded, and altered by hand. Imagine an old pair of jeans spread across the floor of a communal apartment. A needle passes through the knee. A piece of patterned fabric covers a tear. Colored thread slowly becomes a flower along one leg. When the work is finished, the garment may have begun as a mass-produced object, but it no longer looks easily reproducible. That mattered. Hand alteration allowed people to turn inexpensive clothing into a visible statement of individuality. Denim's working-class associations also suited a movement suspicious of the consumption and conformity of post-war society. At the 1969 Woodstock Festival, faded and personalized denim appeared throughout the crowd. But the clothing industry was watching too, and it learned quickly. By the early 1970s, manufacturers and designers were borrowing the same visual vocabulary that had emerged from counterculture: patchwork, embroidery, handmade-looking decoration. Even Woodstock itself could become a commercial image. Surviving denim garments from the period include shorts printed with a photograph of the festival crowd. A movement partly defined by suspicion of consumer culture was already being transformed into something consumer culture could sell. Levi Strauss & Co. went further in 1973 by announcing a denim art contest, inviting people to decorate jeans with paint, embroidery, beads, applique, and other techniques. The contradiction was difficult to miss. People had taken standardized clothing and altered it to make it personal. The market discovered that the appearance of individuality could also become a product category. That lesson prepared denim for its next transformation. By the late 1970s, the name attached to a pair of jeans could become as important as anything the owner did to them afterward. Designer fashion moved in. Yves Saint Laurent had already begun using denim within his Rive Gauche ready-to-wear collections in the late 1960s, translating a utilitarian material into carefully designed fashion silhouettes. In Italy, Elio Fiorucci pushed jeans toward an even more body-conscious identity. His tight safety jeans emphasized the figure rather than hard use. At places like Studio 54 in New York, denim now belonged to a world of nightlife, celebrities, photographers, dancing, and sexual display. The questions customers asked had changed. A shopper standing in front of a mirror was not primarily examining whether the pocket corners would survive years of tools and physical labor. The concern was fit. How did the jeans shape the hips? How did they look from behind? How did they move? Which name was visible on the garment? Calvin Klein made that commercial logic unmistakable. In 1978, he introduced his own line of designer jeans. They were tight, high-waisted, carefully branded, and positioned not merely as practical trousers but as fashion objects. Distinctive stitching and a Calvin Klein label on the back pocket turned a functional part of the garment into advertising space. The pocket still carried things. Now it also carried status. That change altered the economics of denim. Companies no longer had to compete only on fabric, construction, or longevity. They could compete through silhouette, advertising, sexuality, cultural relevance, and brand prestige. A recognizable label could increase the perceived value of two pieces of clothing made from broadly similar material. The wearer no longer had to create every layer of identity through years of use or hand customization. The brand could supply the identity in advance. And once the fashion industry proved that jeans could be sold through image as powerfully as through function, another opportunity appeared. The earliest workers had spent months and years accidentally creating faded thighs, worn knees, softened cloth, scratches, creases, and repaired tears. Those marks had once been evidence that something had happened to the garment. Fashion was about to discover that it did not need to wait. Factories could manufacture the history too.